All right. We're kicking off the webinar. I see people joining. We're going to give it a few minutes for everybody to trickle in. But while we wait, I'm super curious to hear where everybody's joining from. So if you're coming in from the audience, use the little questions box marked with the question mark and write to us. Let us know where everybody's joining from. Would love to hear while we wait for the rest of the crew to come in. And if you are here for the webinar on how to get sales and finance working in lockstep in QuickBooks, you are in the right place. And we're joined by Nelson and Tom from Method and FinOptimal, respectively. We'll do intros in just a minute, but yeah, we'll just give it a couple of minutes for everybody to join.
Nelson, I like how you went for the same mannerism than I did, is just the quick peace sign. That's good camaraderie, except I have the Zoom reactions turned on, so I get balloons.
We will not be fighting each other today, that's for sure.
Ooh, I like that.
Okay, I see some responses coming in. We got Allentown, Pennsylvania, Grand Rapids, Michigan, San Antonio, Texas, San Diego, Ottawa, Canada. I lived for 5 years in Ottawa. I hope the snow hasn't destroyed your entire week. Montreal, Ormond Beach, Florida. I'd much rather be there than in Ottawa, not gonna lie. Okay, so we're a few minutes after 2. We're gonna get started, and we'll start up with some introductions. So thank you everybody for joining. My name is Mattis. I will be your host today. I'm actually a new addition to Method in case you're familiar with Method, but prior to joining the company, I spent almost a decade working at the intersection of technology and finance, most recently wrapping up a 3-year run at a business banking platform called Relay. Um, Joining me from Method as well is Nelson de Miranda, and he is the Senior Director of Sales, Customer Success, and Professional Services here at Method, leading the teams that make it all happen. He's been helping business owners streamline their operations for, if I'm doing my math correctly, Nelson, the past like over 15 years, I believe.
Yeah, you got
Um,
me.
Cool. And so, you've always seen a fair share of kind of both the awful and brilliant setups when it comes to sales and finance alignment. So, looking forward to hearing all about that. And then finally, we have Tom Zehentner joining us from FinOptimal, where he is the Director of Growth and Product. Tom is a CPA. He's a lifelong accounting automation specialist and a self-admitted recovering auditor. And so I hope that resonates with anybody who knows anything about auditing. Previous to FinOptimal, Tom has also held roles at WeWork and a consulting firm, Protiviti. He's also the host of the uniquely titled Another Not Another Accounting podcast, where I believe you're interviewing leading accounting and finance professionals. So those are our panelists today. We have Nels representing more of the sales side, Tom representing more of the accounting side, and I'll do my best to play referee throughout. We're going to get started soon, but before we do, just a few housekeeping items. First of all, the session is being recorded, so you will get a link afterwards in case you have to jump early. We do hope you stay until the end, though. We will have a Q&A, and we'll tackle any unaddressed questions towards that end. And then the webinar itself is interactive, so expect questions. As you've already tested it out with telling me where you're joining from, use that little question field to send us a message if you're trying to find how to communicate with us. And then our agenda for today is multifold. First, we're going to talk about the actual cost of misalignment and why anybody should care in the first place. And then we'll walk through a few scenarios. So you'll actually have an opportunity to share your own scenario with us and have our panel try and think through where some of the misalignment is happening. And then finally, we will show you how you can get sales and finance aligned and cap things off with that Q&A. So with that in mind, let's start with a little bit of the conversation around the cost of misalignment. I do want us to get the audience a little bit better though. So we're gonna launch a little poll for folks. So give me a second while I pull this up. And you should see the screen taken over by a poll. You should still be able to hear us, but we'll just wait for the answers to trickle in and share them with the audience in just 1 minute. So yeah, the options for you are sales, finance. Maybe you're inhabiting both worlds, or maybe you're here, from a completely different side of the fence, and just trying to better understand what that alignment looks like. And I'm seeing some of the answers come in. I'm just going to give it a few minutes.
Curious what the other are.
Yeah, if you're choosing other, definitely send us a note in the Q&A box.
Who else has conflict with finance? Let's say marketing, business
Oh yeah.
owners.
Okay, just going to give it a few more seconds here. Okay, let's take a look at these results. We got about 23% coming from sales, 30 from finance, 35% inhabiting both worlds, which is honestly very interesting to see, and then a few folks coming from other. So if you're in another field, I would love to hear where you're coming from. So let us know in the chat. Um, cool. So moving on to kind of the core of this webinar and this conversation, is this question around, okay, how are sales and finance misaligned? But I think we need to start at the point of thinking through, does each side actually know what it means to be aligned? And I'm going to throw this to the panel, the first one, for Nelson and Tom. Nelson, I'm going to start with you. You're obviously embedded on the sales side of things. I'm wondering from your perspective, what you kind of see as the core job of finance.
Yeah, it's a tough one, right? I think finance covers a bunch of things. First and foremost, making sure that the company remains profitable. That's the company's goals. Some companies, their goals are to burn through as much capital as possible for growth. But I think for the most of us, sustainable growth and making sure we're paying our taxes on time is sort of where my head is at when it comes to finance. In my experience with finance, a big part of where we spend time together is really just around forecasting, revenue forecasting, understanding short term and long term impacts of some of the decisions we're going to make, whether that's excessive discounting. Maybe we have a lot of customers who have gone past their payment terms. And so understanding sort of the risk of collections and where we can help finance teams sort of with those collections. So in general, I don't think their job in finance is to, slow us down on sales, but just making sure that we're making good decisions. And sometimes in sales, good decisions mean it hurts us in the short term in our pocketbook, but really just trying to work together. So, Tom, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but basically my
Yeah,
ball and chain.
I agree. I mean, I'm sales. I'm can't come from finance, but I'm sales now, so I kind of play both sides of the fence here. I feel like if you ask sales, sales would say we keep the lights on and finance gets us in trouble. And if you ask finance, they would say sales does whatever they want and we keep the lights on. I think that's what we're going to cover, right? But I think finance's job, if you split finance and accounting, right? Like bookkeeping is what happened. I think like accounting or controller level, upper level accounting is why did it happen? And then finance, really like FP&A is, well, what's going to happen moving forward, right? And I think it's important for sales to be aligned with all three of those to understand the impact of their decisions that they've made historically and will make moving forward.
Awesome. Love those perspectives, Tom and Nelson. So jumping into kind of the the deeper question around alignment, if teams are misaligned, does this actually matter? And this was I love this this meme that you shared, Tom. around what the relationship can sometimes feel like. But when it comes down to it, sometimes you'll always have these rough relationships between two different teams or departments inside of a company, and sometimes it's a natural byproduct of what they do, and maybe it's not the end of the world. But obviously, everybody who's coming into this webinar might feel like there's something more foundational to that friction, and so I actually just want to throw out a couple of stats about the general landscape when it comes to businesses, and how this relationship might actually be affecting them more deeply. And these are very recent. One from a 2024 report around the fact that 43% of sales and finance leaders report that their forecasts are off by at least 10%, which, that can go up to 20, 25% in some cases, which is really quite challenging and potentially scary for a company. And then when that stat is combined with the fact that over half of B2B invoices are actually paid late, you suddenly get into a pretty risky situation when it comes to business and financial. So I'm curious, Nelson, Tom, if these stats and the general landscape kind of reflects what you've been seeing, and maybe I'll throw this over to Tom to start.
Yeah, for sure. I think, the last side of your question too, like what's the cost of misalignment? I think there's two things. One, growth at all costs is dangerous. I think that ZERP era, unlimited money for funding era is over. And it's really important to be profitable, right? And it's important for sales to understand the impact of what they're doing, not just in bringing in revenue for the business, but making sure the revenue that they bring in can be serviced profitably overall, really thinking about the business and not just their variable compensation. You also have to think about the cost of accounting for something. I think it's sales wants to close a deal. Maybe we do something that the CRM doesn't automatically let us do. We kind of go outside the lines. But now whose job is that to make sure that that data is going to be reflected correctly to stakeholders, to investors, depending on the size of your company, to auditors, right? And there becomes a growing cost to actually keep track of what sales is bringing in the door. And I think that data cleanliness can be, something to be worried about, especially when, Montes, you bring up this point, forecasts are off by at least 10%. Why? Is that just aggressive sales goals? Of course, in many cases, I'm sure that's part of it. Or is it the fact that the underlying data that you're basing your forecasts on is not accurate? And why is it not accurate, right? It's sales and finance's job to come together and make sure that what they're doing is profitable as a company and the data itself reflects how the business is doing.
Yeah, I just to add to that, I mean, based off my experience on forecasting in particular, we definitely had moments on our sales work where we felt like our forecasts were definitely off by double digits. That one does resonate with me quite heavily. And something we did was, to Tom's point, really align with finance and understand what is the margin of error we're willing to operate within, and what does that mean. And so as a team, we've aligned on 3 to 5% is sort of where we should be aiming for. Obviously, these percentages will vary based off industry, the type of information you have at hand, and where you're driving the insights from. But in general, alignment on that sort of range or that error range has been absolutely critical to our success because it allows us to set expectations. And for that matter, we're able to make better business decisions outside of sales, and finance, right? It's important for us to understand that forecasting and accurate forecasting is going to result in decisions that may or may not impact our departments or our organization directly. We may want to hire more welders, more engineers, depending on the type of business, based off sales numbers and forecasts. And so people's lives are really at stake, and the business decisions to grow really depend on our overall accurate measurements. And one of the things that is super exciting is that once you get it, and once you're comfortable with that forecasting and there's that healthy friction, being comfortably uncomfortable with some of the numbers, it really helps the whole team come together and bond and understand, okay, where are there areas or opportunities for growth? When do we start talking about price increases or service changes? How do we begin to alleviate some of the sales debt that Tom is mentioning, right? And so, yeah, that's my addition on that comment there.
Awesome. And I definitely want to get to those opportunities for growth areas. And I think a good starting point here for us would be to talk about some of the root causes and then transition into where they can really be treated as opportunities. So I think we have a couple here, but one big one is around incentives. And it's the fact that the way that a sales organization is rewarded sometimes is strictly on those top line bookings or maybe something like closing speed, whereas finance might care about, margin profitability, cash flow. There's a lot of other things that will be on its plate as well. I'm curious, from both of your perspectives. Have you seen examples of incentives being misaligned, either kind of in your own experience or even working with clients, right? People maybe offering like crazy deals just to meet quota, or those numbers not fully being locked in again from either a forecasting perspective or from the what can we actually deliver point of view, and where we're all working together. John, I'm going to throw this one over to you first.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times we work backwards from finance. In my experience, finance is typically compensated with like a pretty sizable base salary, maybe some equity in the company. Finance variable compensation, unless you're at like a high leadership level, isn't necessarily like it's not as standard, if you will, right? Where sales is obviously more heavily weighted towards cash compensation based on short-term performance. And I think it's really important to incentivize your sales team to sell deals that are good for the company in the long run, right? Be aware of things like, hey, if they sell an annual contract or a quarterly contract today, am I paying them on the full value of that contract? If they discount it so heavily just so they can get above a certain watermark and get a kicker, right? Well, can we still profitably service that deal over the next 3 to 6 to 12 months, right? So I think whenever you're setting, we're talking about incentives, people are incentivized in my mind by money, time off, promotions. Like, we're simple creatures here. Obviously, some people do it for other things. Pride, great. People care about money. Be careful in how you incentivize your team so that they don't benefit from something that doesn't benefit the company overall. And I think finance, again, typically, if they're going to be compensated with equity, well, what do they want? They want the business to do well overall. That's why they're kind of the cops sometimes. Like, they come off as narcs or cops, but no, they're just trying to make sure the lights stay on, right?
Yeah, I agree with Tom on that one. I think it's interesting when we kind of go through sales organization structures in particular. You have this, you have your traditional sales cycle where you have your pre-sales person who may be in charge of bookings, like
Right.
you mentioned, Matas. Then you have someone who is sort of pure sales working on closing, and then you have the renewal management piece of it. And I find that those structures in particular lead to a lot of what I call sales debt, where you have these difficult conversations with finance, but also with those customers further down the line as you try to alleviate that sales debt, whether that is, when they have to pay full price for a renewal, if it's subscription based, maybe managing sort of their expectations later on when they don't purchase as much product volume. It's always a challenge. And so something we've done is we've actually moved away from that traditional sales cycle flow, and we've moved our sales reps to do more full life cycle management, which is really important. And why it's been important for us as a business is it really helps to disincentivize, crazy discounts, for lack of a better word, just to close a customer, really focusing on the value that our product or service is offering. And then having that sales rep manage that book of business over the course of its life cycle helps to, one, on the finance side, keep our margins more predictable. But two, it's also just leaning into the value of our product, leaning into the value of our service. So we're not having these conversations later on, why was there a 40% price increase, on renewal, or, passing that conversation off to other team members who are not familiar with the origins of the deals. Naturally, as you scale, eventually you will have these specialized roles. And as we've scaled, we've focused on not necessarily closing book of business. It's a portion of our variable compensation. Like Tom said, variable comp is important to us, but also recurring revenue and what that looks like. We often talk about net revenue retention, which is
Yep.
something we should all get familiar with on the sales side, of our sales, who's growing, who's churning out, who's repeat revenue, and understanding our customer base a little bit more, because that helps us align with our positioning on the sales at the top of funnel, but then also making sure our customers are successful through the middle and the bottom of funnel, which will eventually lead to more success on the finance side as well.
Awesome. And do you find it, Nelson, that also when you have this model where it really does like the full cycle that is in view for the person who's working on the deal, that the ownership is also closer to them in terms of how they think about and how they interact with the customer?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the toughest transitions in sales that I've faced over the years is the transition from a salesperson to, let's say, traditional customer success or to an account manager. It's a high friction transition, and anything we can do to ease that transition is important. And when you think about those high friction conversations, it's, hey, there's a new person who doesn't understand who I am. How do you alleviate that problem? There's a now this conversation on renewal. Well, I got this stranger now reaching out to me telling me I need to pay 40% more because they signed in for a 1 year promo at the beginning of the year. And so, really, just having that book of business managed by a central person to a degree helps. With scale, I think rather than offloading difficult conversations to certain roles, we do have assisted roles, right? And so, our customer success team, for example, won't necessarily manage the book of business, but it'll support that book of business. So, we'll still have our traditional person who's owning that account, their value, whether they're churning out or purchasing more product. But then we have this supplemental staff that then supports them. And to Tom's point, that allows us to create predictable revenue streams because we are now not necessarily worried about, raising our prices every year or changing up or sending out a new contract every quarter. We're just focused on predictable servicing of those customers, which will lead to both organic growth for the business, but across that customer as well.
I think the full service ownership, I mean the full cycle ownership is important too, because I think we alluded to it but didn't touch on it. A lot of businesses I think have like a very fragmented funnel. Like I'm incentivized by meetings, but how do we measure the quality of the meetings? Okay, I'm incentivized by new users onboarded. Well, what's the quality of those users? How long are they going to stay for? Right? And when you kind of build in some of those other metrics, you mentioned net revenue retention. We actually bake in gross revenue retention too. I think that it eliminates the ability to just replace bad deals with more bad deals, right? Gross revenue retention doesn't allow you to factor in new business when you're thinking about that, or even sometimes we do a modified gross revenue retention, which is changes only from existing customers. Again, you can't replace bad customers with more bad customers. Thinking about those things, sometimes putting on your hat and thinking, well, how could somebody game this? And thinking through, hey, is that realistic, right? You don't want to set it up where they feel like they want to game it to make more money, right? Like don't make them be the bad guy because you've set bad incentives. I think that's leadership's job to think through, what do we really want these people to do?
Awesome. I just want to call out two things. One, I saw Bob in the Q&A asking if we're going to be talking about Method and some of the integration back to finance, i.e. QuickBooks. We will address that towards the end of the webinar, 100%. And then Tom, I actually had a follow-up on this, just for anybody in the audience, maybe the people who are exclusively on the sales side or other who aren't really dealing with the finance side of things. Could you just give a little bit of an explainer on net revenue retention and gross revenue retention, how sales should be thinking about it and why it matters to them?
Sure. I mean, net revenue retention to me is kind of I don't want to call it a silly metric because it's not, right? But it's like, hey, how much revenue? It's last month revenue plus this month revenue divided by, or start to say last month revenue plus new period revenue divided by last period revenue, right? So how much did revenue change overall? Where you're allowed to count new revenue to offset lost revenue, churn, downgrades, etc. Gross revenue retention is last period revenue divided by, sorry, this period revenue divided by last period revenue, right? So if you have 100 customers and they all pay $100 and two churn, and you add five new, gross revenue retention does not allow you to consider the five new customers. So it's a way to measure how good are the customers I'm bringing in? How often are they going to be a repeat customer, right? How good are we doing at actually selling the product? I think that's another thing to consider, right? That our sales team set the wrong expectations and these people bought once and weren't satisfied with the product, not from a product fault, but from maybe the sales or marketing or communication fault. So gross revenue retention basically doesn't let you hide lost revenue with net new revenue.
Gotcha. That's very, very helpful. So I want to move on to some of our next items here, and just be conscious of time. We have a few things leading up to, I think, a bigger picture of misalignment, but there's siloed data, underdefined handoff, and the relationship between the sales and finance, and then also just sometimes the teams being really misconnected when it comes to communicating with each other. I'm wondering, Nelson, I'll start with you on this one. When it comes to these three pieces, communication, underdefined handoff, data silos, is there anything that you find to be kind of a recurring theme when it comes to the relationship between sales and finance, and where some of those breaking points happen out of these three things?
Yeah, communication is a big one. I think very often at a leadership level, especially, everyone has their goals and there's explicit mandates, that may come down from that you may sort of agree upon as a group, whether that's set in a budget at the beginning of the year or the end of the year before, and sort of achieving that budget. But having structured check-ins is super important. Something I do with my operator or my QuickBooks admin, depending on what you want to call them, is just really sitting down every 2 weeks and reviewing, what the revenue looks like, what are outstanding payment issues in general. How are we going to navigate some of these larger deals? Where do I need financial assistance? Where, is there a period of time where we want to offer custom terms like 180 days, or we want to do something like a 2-year deal or a 3-year deal that goes outside of our norm? And it's often one of those things where in sales, you always feel like you're being slowed down. Why aren't things going faster? Why can't I get the support I need? And really, finance is doing its due diligence to ensure, the margins are right, the servicing agreement is correct, and making sure that we're all aligned towards our business goals. So communication is always important. And so something I set forward is to meet bi-weekly to at least agree to disagree on some things and just understand what are the risks that are impacting not only my teams, our departments, right, but also what are the risks to the business, so we can effectively communicate that to the C-level executive team and give them an understanding of, here are things we need to be concerned about. Here's how we can action or fix things, without, you know, slowing down sales for the most part.
Gotcha. Tom, any thoughts around data handoff or communication between the departments?
I mean, I think all three of them are so spot on, and it makes me reflect on my time at WeWork, right? I think there were such aggressive growth goals, and sales needed to hit certain targets to keep the business alive, right? To try to IPO, and I think there was, and I think in many organizations there is a confusion around the handoff, right? I think that was one of the things you had on your slide, right? So when sales closes a deal, I don't think they are normally thinking, okay, well, what happens next? Like, where does this data go, right? Okay, cool, closed one in the CRM, but now what? They turn back and go, let me hit the phones more, right? Let me close more deals. And I think finance can honestly become kind of disgruntled from that and say, well, I just keep getting stuff thrown at me. How are we getting here? Why is this happening? Like, why am I stuck with this? And I think when you put those two people in a room and say, hey, by the way, when you fill out this field incorrectly, or when you just freestyle and put a random string of text, it makes my job incredibly difficult. It adds 30 minutes, it adds an hour, and that stuff piles up and I can't get this done. Oh, okay, well, we can just stop using that field, right? Sometimes I think it's important to put those two people in a room and say, hey, walk through the closing process for sales. And then, hey, sales, watch how finance handles your data. And I think sometimes when you see that in real time, we've done that here as we've rapidly grown and we've just thrown stuff into Stripe and then been like, why can't I get a report? Oh, wow, we really messed that up. I'm sorry. We'll stop doing that, right? You start to see how that handoff happens and it makes you appreciate the other side, right? And from a finance perspective, hey, they are keeping the lights on. They are bringing in business, right? And from a sales perspective, hey, these people do need to make sure they can say how good of a job you're doing with real numbers. So you got to work together, and that handoff is so critical.
Love that. Okay, so we're at the halfway point, so I want to keep moving. And I think this is something that we discussed prior to the webinar. And it's this concept of an overall root cause being the lack of P&L ownership, meaning that there's like a fundamental misalignment around what are we all working towards. And Tom, I think your example of rework is fantastic here because alignment on the P&Ls looks very different there than it might look to a bootstrapped business that is trying to sustainably make it to the 5 or 10 year mark and kind of see slow growth. Have you seen this be kind of a core piece of the misalignment historically?
I think so. I got to watch how much stuff I say about WeWork. I can't remember what I signed on my exit papers. No, I'm kidding. I think P&L ownership overall is really a mindset. It's for those thinking what does this mean? This is just jargon, right? It's like, hey, it's not just about revenue. It's about the revenue and the expenses and thinking about the business overall. Another way to say it is, think of it as if it's your business or have an entrepreneurial mindset to the way that you approach your role in sales, right? Sales is often incentivized by revenue, bring in more business. But you have to constantly be considering, if you care about the long-term success of the company, what is the cost to service that revenue? If I sell a deal for 120 grand, right? How much is that going to cost the business? Right. And I think those are conversations that need to be actively happening between sales and marketing, right? That's where having a sales playbook that says you can discount up to this much only in extenuating circumstances, and you must get finance approval for a greater discount. That's why that makes sense. Because you might say, hey, great, I just closed a $90,000 contract, but it's going to cost the company $95,000 to service it. So congrats, you just lost the company $5,000. If there is a sense of P&L ownership, of end-to-end ownership of your relationship with that customer and the business you bring in, you can start to think more seriously about it. And to Nelson's point earlier, right, sometimes looking at those numbers for the first time can be scary. It can be sobering. But once you see what those numbers are and can have a realistic conversation about, hey, here's what we can and can't do, you start to march towards something that's actually going to be amazing and not just something that you can brag about on LinkedIn for 5 minutes before you go bankrupt.
Yeah, no, you nailed it. I think, yeah, on the P&L, it's just something that's lacking is really that financial literacy on the sales side, which is crazy, right? Because you're selling, you should understand finances to some degree. I don't think you should understand tax rates for counties and states and federal tax, dates. But what you should understand is how your business is operating, where's that money going, how's it being used, how's it being serviced, right? And one of the first examples when I started off in sales was I was big into selling long-term contracts, and I loved them. Right, it helped all my KPIs. My customers didn't churn; they were happy. They would stick around for the most part, and they were continually investing. But I just didn't understand how that revenue was being recognized on a regular basis. Right, so I would sell a $50,000 deal, which might be small potatoes, but for me it was big potatoes at the time. And my sales team or my finance team approached me and was like, okay, well, these deals are great. It's great that these customers are prepaying for services for 12 to 18 months. But to Tom's point, you're now creating all this administrative work for me because we have to create an invoice for this month, and then we have to issue an invoice for every month after that. And we have to allocate all this money to a liability account. And then every single month go through and reconcile against a liability account. And honestly, I was just so overwhelmed to the point where I was almost incentivized to no longer sell these long term deals because just having to go through the mental gymnastics of reconciling what my bonus would be every single month because I wouldn't get comped necessarily on selling that big deal up front. I was being comped at the time, probably intelligently, as revenue was being recognized every single month. And so for me, um, I was put off. I was like, man, this kind of sucks because it was a big deal, and now I'm only earning it a little by little. But I think as I've matured and as my financial literacy has grown, it starts to make more and more sense. And diving deeper into gross margin and understanding profitability by employee and understanding all of that has really enabled me to build a successful sales team, but a model that's repeatable and something that we can be in line with finance on. So I just want to share that example because that was for me a major turning point for me in sales where I was just like, what am I doing wrong here?
The annual contract piece is always very interesting to me too. Obviously, there's a lot of reasons why you want to sell an annual contract, right? You don't necessarily need to be renewing them every month, right? They pay up front. It's great for cash flow purposes, obviously. But in theory, you're also kind of like financing against yourself. Like you're just borrowing from the future. So when you think about, hey, every customer, let's take a very simple example. Every customer costs $5,000 a month for me to service. I normally sell it for $6,000 a month, but with my annual agreement, I'm now selling it for $5,500 a month. Okay, well, it's still going to cost you $5,000 a month to service it. I'm now making $500 of profit in this overly simple example a month. Is it worth losing $500 a month to get the cash up front now? What am I doing with that cash? Right? Why am I incentivizing my team to sell annual contracts? Right? And thinking about those things again, P&L ownership will help you say, yeah, actually, like I don't think we're going to sell annual contracts, right? Like at FinOptimal, like we don't sell annual contracts, right? We just started selling 2 this year out of thousands of people because they were like, please, can we do it? I don't want to deal with it. But I'd rather bet on myself every month to deliver an amazing product and get paid what I set the price to be, right? Why am I going to borrow against myself? They're not going to go
Awesome.
anywhere.
Yep.
Uh, I do actually have a follow-up question for Nelson, but first, what I want to do is launch our second and final poll. And the question for you, Nelson, is when you started to kind of dig into seeing that full picture, I'm wondering what was your process of how long did it kind of take you to get up to speed and have that broader picture? And our poll today, the second one is just about how aligned the sales and finance teams are internally, based on the conversation that you're hearing now for you and your company. So I'm just going to launch that now. And yeah, over to you, Nelson. What's your process for getting acquainted with finance from the sales side? Did you
Yeah, yeah. I
read
mean,
Accounting for Dummies or something?
no, I mean my finance leadership team was pretty patient with me, I would say. Um, I might not be the sharpest tool in the shed, but definitely caught on pretty quickly. I think you just have to continue to approach things with an open mind and understand that you may not understand the full picture, but you have to trust those who are advising you in some degree. I think if you're always trying to own, talking about the P&L, if we're always trying to own every single item and understand why exactly this item is better than the other, or trying to understand exchange rates and the benefit of exchange, you can get lost, right? So there's an element of trusting what others are telling you to do. To Tom's point, if my finance team advised me, hey, annual contracts are a bad idea, here's why. Our retention rate is pretty good on customers on a monthly commitment. When you do annual contracts, we find that your team is heavily discounting on a monthly basis, where we're losing anywhere between 10 to 25% of revenue because of that discount for a long-term commitment. It may not make financial sense. And so I think for me at the starting point was learning to trust um, the advice I was getting from finance in particular, but then also knowing when to have those discussions and knowing how to potentially show a different viewpoint as to, yeah, in the short term, there may be a loss of revenue. But if we were to look at our average customer age, we found that with annual contracts, we may be doubling or tripling our customer age. Customer satisfaction might be higher because customers feel like they're getting a spiff in return for their commitment. And so there are things that can't necessarily be measured that sometimes feel anecdotal, but that's where finance benefits from sales as well, as you bring those perspectives to the table. And there's always a compromise that's going on there where there's a bit of a give and take relationship. So yeah, it's taken me years to learn the ins and outs of a P&L, the impact of exchange rates and taxes and credit card processing fees and all the stuff that we kind of take for granted in sales that someone's figuring out. But it's definitely a two-way street where you have to educate each other and understand why you're taking a deal over American Express over Visa or ACH, right? Even micro decisions like that are incredibly impactful to the business.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like a whole journey to get to the point where you have like a really solid handle on it. And we see the poll results here coming through, just the mix between different folks in the audience. So it sounds like a quarter are in total chaos when it comes to
Love it.
alignment. And we got 8%, a few folks in lockstep. All right. Well, I hope you're still getting value from this webinar, even if your teams are fully lockstep. Great. So we have we're a little over the halfway mark now. What we're going to switch over to is a couple of scenarios, and we'll do a demonstration of what your solutions might look like for getting folks into full alignment. So we'll throw out one scenario here. If folks have their own scenario that they want to describe, something that's happening in your company, please use that chat box with the question mark and send us a few bullet points on the biggest issue that you see with the collaboration or lack thereof when it comes to sales and finance. But we're just going to walk through one scenario, and then I think we're going to transition into some of the stuff that Nelson and Tom, you guys have prepared for showing us today. So this scenario, it's a company called Bright Spark Manufacturing. And this is something that has, happened to folks in the past, and it's a recurring thing. So, the company wins a larger manufacturing contract, something that's bigger than what they're used to. Client ends up paying up front because they strike up this really solid deal, and the service is to be delivered over 6 months. But a company hits a shortfall. The team uses the prepayment to cover other expenses, and then the upfront payment is technically still an earned revenue. So costs start to pile up. And then now the company is in this situation where they're stuck trying to service this large, important client, but they don't actually have the requisite cash in the bank to do it. And then you're scrambling and running into really significant cash flow issues at that point. So before I turn it over to Nelson and Tom for the examples, I mean, I'm just wondering at a high level, like how could this have gone better? Tom, maybe I'll just stick with you here, and then Nelson will throw over to an example.
Sales should not have gotten a nice steak dinner when they closed a 6-month deal. We all know they did that. We all know they went out for drinks. No, I mean, I think as soon as you book that invoice, right, you need to say, okay, hey, this is for 6 months, so let's think about this deal correctly, right? So split the revenue over 6 months up front. Okay, cool. Now we can see it's not as much money as I thought it was, right? Hey, are we going to have the people? Are we going to have the bandwidth to service that, right? I think very simply is you take that deal the second you close it and you stop thinking about it as a $60,000 contract and you think about it as a $10,000 monthly contract. And as soon as you do that divided by 6, everything else is much more sobering. And you can avoid the rest. Then you're just doing regular business, right? I think that's it. Starts at number 1 bullet point.
Awesome. Really appreciate that perspective, Tom. I think Nelson, we're going to throw it over to you now to actually give us a bit of an overview. So just for the folks in the audience, This is one way that you can try to start working towards alignment between sales and finance, specifically from that communication, data, and process perspective. And Tom is going to show what you can actually accomplish. Sorry, Nelson, you're going to show what you can actually accomplish with Method, and then we'll throw it over to Tom to take a look at how that can be reflected inside of QuickBooks and how that alignment can be achieved from a tool perspective. So Nelson, I'm making you presenter now. Let me know if you're able to
Yeah, I got you here. This
demonstrate. Yeah,
is great.
and
So I'm just
how this scenario could have gone better, maybe for Brightspark.
yeah. So we're gonna kick it off right from the top, which is this is a view of Method, and we're just gonna knock off a quick proposal for Spark. I created a customer called Anderson Consulting here, and just making sure that looks good. And then just go through Brightspark proposal. We'll kick that over. It does say there's no contacts. Let me just go through that. Live demos. So we're gonna
And
go.
so I think one of the things for anybody in the audience who's not familiar with Method and the platform, this is a CRM that has a bidirectional sync within QuickBooks Online, and what it allows you to do is have these full-on kind of end-to-end workflows where the things that sales does on the front end actually gets reflected back inside of your in your accounting system. And then Tom can go in there and apply some of the FinOptimal magic to it as well, and you have a really kind of solid end-to-end workflow where maybe some of the blame game stops because folks have more visibility into things.
Yeah.
Throwing it
So
back to you, Nelson.
no, thank you. I appreciate it. So just kicking it off here. We're gonna set up that proposal. So we'll say it's an upfront prepayment. And what we're going to call it is construction assets. So let me just copy that here. We'll paste that right in there, construction assets. And we'll say it's for a 6-month contract is what Tom, or what the scenario alluded to. So we'll say Feb to Jan, and we'll say it's at a rate of $120,000. So it was great with Method. We're going to set up that proposal. We're going to send that off. And we are going to just select an engagement letter, which provides a list of all the services, what they should expect, all that good stuff. We'll include a quick message saying your proposal, and we'll send that off to the customer. So what Method does is it really tries to assist the sales aspect of it, where we can start sending off these proposals that are formatted in a way so that QuickBooks can handle it and see it. So basically informing our sales staff or our finance staff as things are happening with a deal. So we're going to go into this proposal as the recipient of it, and the customer will be able to review that proposal accordingly, review sort of the terms and conditions as well as the period of it. And then last but not least, step into this and add a signature. So we're just going to have some fun here. Not really great at drawing, but we'll accept that proposal. And the terms of the proposal were they would have to pay for when it was accepted. So again, this is a prepayment. So we're going to go in and then process this $120,000 payment accordingly. So we're just going to keep it simple here. And, don't take any screenshots because this is test data, so you won't be able to steal my credit card information just yet.
Thought I was going to get rich.
So we're going to process that. And so what's great is once that customer accepts that proposal, there's no need for us to forward emails to finance. There's no need for us to have a passback or an email or letting them know the terms and conditions. Finance is going to be able to step right back into Method as well as QuickBooks here. And I'll change this over to Anderson just to make sure it lines up with the customer that it's actually for. But inside of here, they'll be able to see this. It'll be assigned an invoice number. There'll be a payment as well as an invoice issued for them. And what I'm going to do is actually, if you wouldn't mind, Matas, just take the presentation off me and flip it over to Tom so Tom can actually show how this looks in
If you
QuickBooks.
can wait 1 second, I want to just call out, right? So like Nelson just walked through this process of how easy Method makes it, right, to have this sales to finance handoff. And what he did in that invoice, right, it's a 6-month invoice. He wrote for the period Feb 2025 to July 2025. Those 3 little words for the period is going to allow our app, Accruer, and I'll tell you more about us in a second, work seamlessly. We've done no product work between each other, but our apps just naturally work together because those 3 words in Method are going to feed over to QuickBooks and our app's going to take it from there. Just wanted to show it before we moved off that you wrote it in your system and how we're going to take it over from here.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. The nerves kind of took over. Live demos always get you a little nervous, but
I know, $120,000 invoice. You're thinking about where you guys are going for dinner.
Yeah, but Tom, I think I'm good, so we can switch over.
Okay. Yeah, throwing it over to you, Tom.
Cool, I love it. And just to give everyone some context before I take the screen. So FinOptimal is both an accounting firm and a software company. We started as an accounting firm and we built our own apps for QuickBooks Online because we knew there was a better, faster, and cheaper way to do accounting. This isn't any sort of gimmick. There's no sort of AI that we're just throwing overseas. These are all real apps built by accountants who know how to code. And the app I'm going to show you now, one part of it is actually Accruer, specifically the deferred revenue module, right? So we talked about earlier, well, what if I sell a multi-month agreement? How do I make sure, right, that I'm accounting for it properly? And with accrual accounting, with revenue, you need to recognize the revenue when you deliver the service or good to your customer, right? So what we do is we allow you to achieve that just by simply writing for the period. So, in Nelson's example, he issued an invoice and Method CRM seamlessly integrates with QuickBooks. The second that this hits QuickBooks, Accruer, our app, will pick it up and account for it on an accrual basis. So our app is looking for this phrase for the period, and it sees Feb 2025 to July 2025. As soon as it hits QuickBooks, you don't need to click a run button. There's not a browser extension. It happens in the background like magic. Accruer will take that 1.2 million, and spread it over the next 6 months. I 10x'd it from your environment to mine, right? So this is what it would normally look like. I book an invoice, right? But once Accruer runs, and if I just refresh it, it's already run, it takes it and splits it out evenly across all of those months, right? And if we zoom in here and go to the whole thing, right, you can see how it's being properly accounted for on an accrual basis. The 1.2 million hits, it comes off, and then we recognize it pro rata over those months. So when your sales or finance team is thinking, hey, where did that money go? What happened with that deal? You can say, hey, here's how it's being recognized over that period of time. Again, this is just one of the many apps that we have, but it works so perfectly with Method. Invoice out of Method, right for the period, Accruer is going to account for it on an accrual basis. And if you're also just doing a 1 month, hey, in February, I sold something for March. You could write for the period March 2025, and it will just shift the revenue to March. So you're aligning your revenue and your costs, and you're not losing sight of how the business is doing. You're injecting P&L ownership into your company. You can stop my sharing.
Okay, amazing. And so because we're coming up to the end and we're going to have our Q&A, so if folks have questions, I did see a few come in, please submit them into the Q&A box. Before we get to that, I do want to call out that we have a couple of special offers for the folks who joined the webinar today and who registered. So we have an offer from Method. If you're looking to try out the CRM and the workflows for your own business, we have a free trial, but then also we have an offer to get 50% off for 3 months. In order to claim this offer, if you're interested, just watch out for an email that you'll get after the webinar. And this is eligible for anybody who's new, or if you've maybe used Method in the past, but you've stopped and you're a returning customer, that will also be eligible. And then Tom, throwing it over to you for the FinOptimal, we're also running an offer for the audience.
Yeah, Method backed me into a corner. I didn't want to look like a cheapo, so I had to match their offer. So we're also doing the same thing, 50% off for 3 months with code Method. Our app is self-service. So if you like what you see, go to finoptimal.com. You can set it up yourself. Every setup video is me in the same hat and a different shirt explaining what to do. So I promise you're in good hands. And we do a 60-day money back guarantee. So if you don't like it, you can tell me I don't like it, and we'll send you your money back. Risk free, get set up in minutes.
Awesome. Love it, Tom. Okay, we're off to the Q&A section. And I have a couple of questions here. I think the first one, actually, I'm going to throw it over to you, Nelson. So Rosalie here was asking, I think it's specific to Method and specifically the proposals app. I think maybe it would be helpful if you could just explain a little bit more about how it works and specifically how it works around turning like leads into customers, because I think there's a bit of a nuanced relationship to the way that things are set up in QuickBooks and kind of like how Method treats those users. So yeah, so the question is, if you're using Proposals app, how do I turn like these leads that I'm sending out proposals to back into customers inside Method?
Yeah, great question. So Method will allow you to sort of keep track of all types of contacts with or without QuickBooks. So you'll be able to track those prospects or leads inside of the system and sort of monitor their growth throughout. The example I showed today, when we send a proposal, at no point does that contact or that proposal live inside of QuickBooks, right? I think one of the problems we run into in particular when working with finance is that we depend on key people on the accounting team to create those proposals for us, send them out, and then have contracts signed by our customers and approved, and then have finance then enter that information into accounting. So what we've done is we've basically created a layer of approval before that, which enables our sales team to send out these proposals. Once a customer agrees to those terms, there is the option to collect payment. And depending on whether or not we collect that payment, we just intelligently say, hey, this is now a posting transaction. So we've now created an invoice with an associated payment with it. Send that over to accounting. So in general, yeah. And so this flow applies to both leads and customers. And you can really control that experience as much or as little as you want. But the idea here is to really just minimize the downtime when creating contracts as well as when passing that information over to accounting, right? Because for me in historical world, at the end of the day, I would rush over all my documents over to finance and be like, hey, I need proposals for these tomorrow, need to get this out. I've been on calls all day, haven't been able to get that out to you just yet. And then, the accounting team would yell at me and then do what I say, and then we would send it out, unfortunately.
Love it. So I have another quick question here from Perry. Is the webinar going to be available after today? Yes, we will be sending out a recording, so watch out for that. And then Nelson, I have another question for you, specifically related to the to the finance and sales alignment. If you're using something like Method, can you set up some sort of a workflow where you want to send specific notifications to finance, like based on either like a specific proposal type, or maybe there's some level of urgency that you have with certain proposals and less urgency with other proposals. Is there a way to do that inside the application?
Yeah, there's multiple layers to it. One of the examples that Tom alluded to earlier today was like discount approval. So let's say, for example, the finance team wants final say on any proposals or estimates, let's say, that are dispatched from the system that have a discount of greater than 10%. We can definitely set up notifications that way to ensure the team is aware, hey, this is a larger than normal discount, finance approval required or manager's approval is required. And that sort of those layers are definitely possible to add through automation. I would also add that there's guardrails that you can set up along the way where you can restrict people's abilities to even send out deals if you wish, or you could have someone create a draft and that would never hit a posting transaction. So sometimes you may have a scenario where you have a salesperson who's ready to take credit card information and an invoice right on the call. And so what we can do is facilitate workflows that notify the accounting team that the sales rep has created an invoice that's waiting for approval. They've collected a payment for that that needs to be applied to the invoice, but it's just pending accounting approval to make sure it's in the right format and maybe the information or the right items are selected. Depending on the complexity of your business, if you're selling services, it's a little bit easier, but if you're selling from 15,000 products, you want to make sure you're using the right SKUs, the right codes, and getting the right prices to your customer as well. So yeah, you can definitely set up a bunch of different notifications or automations depending on what your needs are.
Gotcha. Awesome. Thank you, Nelson. And we are coming up to the hour. Tom, I had one more question for you in terms of the accruer and distributing the revenue. Do I have to write a specific thing, or is the application does it kind of pick up does it pick up different things regardless of how I write the for the period kind of section?
You have to write for the period, but you can pretty much write anything else you want. The reason we do that is because when we say for the period, it sticks in people's heads and it's good marketing. No, the reason we do that is so that you don't accidentally accrue things, right? We don't want to say anything with a date is automatically accrued. We want it to create a trigger phrase that is, not noticeable, right? But is still meaningful. So that's why you have to write for the period. Anything else, you can kind of freestyle it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you, Nelson. I think I will end the webinar maybe with this slide, which we didn't get to share, which was the whole concept, I think, behind our discussion. There's a lot of different areas to evaluate, but at the core of it all, I think, is the concept of P&L ownership. Really, really appreciate everybody for joining the webinar today and appreciate all of your questions. Thank you, Nelson. Thank you, Tom. Any final thoughts, things you want to call out, something about FinOptimal method, anything like that?
Tom, you want to go first?
No, I don't have anything else to say. You can find us on
I just,
FinOptimal.com.
don't be scared. I know there aren't too many salespeople out there. There's, at least on the polls, there aren't too many of you, but I think P&L and profit and loss reports are always intimidating, especially for those of you being introduced to the concept, but it's incredibly powerful. If you're not a business owner, if you're just a salesperson, I think it's important you ask those questions as well and just learn about P&Ls. It's definitely going to help you in your career and your personal growth, at least understanding how a business operates, right? I think a lot of business owners and finance teams take this for granted. It's the blood of the business. But I think for some of us that are more disconnected, we don't necessarily understand all the expenses that go into selling a product or a service. And this is your first step into learning how the business truly operates from the ground up.
Love it. All
You,
right.
you did make me want to say something, which is, yeah, P&L ownership is great, and I'm glad we talked about it. But don't forget about the balance sheet either. All right, that's the next webinar, I guess. But don't forget about that. Don't just rig your P&L because you're not going to do any better.
Love it. Love it.
That's my
Yeah, that definitely calls for a two-parter there. All right. Well, thank you both. Hope that everybody has a great rest of your days off and great rest of your day. And watch out for the email with the offer from ourselves and then from Optimal as well. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.